provide, and all of us knew there was a line that couldn't be crossed because his temper was finite. Most of the time he wanted a quiet life, but push him too far and he would snap. When he did, I'd leg it up to my bedroom. Thankfully, it was so tiny I could sit against the chimney breast and wedge my legs against the door when he chased after me so he couldn't get in. Not that my mother worried too much about his temper. "So you think you're the big man, do you, Sammy Newton?" she'd cry. "Well, I'm sick and tired of waiting for you to mend that bathroom shelf, and if you think you're not going to creosote the fence, then you'll have to think again." My father's inability to properly finish household tasks was a constant source of conflict, but my parents' making up was always swift, and most importantly, even Mum knew there were times when she had to keep quiet. "If I hit my head on that cupboard one more time, then I'll surely end up in a hole for the bloody insane," she exclaimed one day as Dad sat at the kitchen table smoking a Players and carefully filling in his books with all that day's Brook Bond orders. The blue Formica cupboard had been the subject of my mother's wrath for months. Without a word, Dad got up, walked over to the cupboard, and lifted it off the wall. China and all. "It won't get in your way now, will it?" he said as he sat back down. Not another word was said for at least half an hour. It was the longest period of silence that kitchen had ever known. Dad grew up just off the Falls Road in Belfast and moved to England as a young man, working first as a bus conductor before talking his way into a job as a sausage salesman. Disciplined and hard-working, he then got a job at Brook Bond that paid enough for him to get a mortgage on our 3-bed terraced house. But that was Sam. Other people might live in council houses, but he made sure to pay his own. To everyone around him, he was a leader, a go-getter, and not a man you crossed. Everything about the way Dad looked, from his good wool Crombie coat to his well-cut suits and wool-lined silk scarf, told you that he had aspirations. Austin Reed was his favourite shop, another world from the places he visited on his rounds. Instead of packets of caster sugar and tins of oxtail soup, there were soft silk ties rolled and displayed like jewels on a table. In place of the smell of doughnuts and newsprint, the scent of starch and polish filled the air. We'd go there occasionally if Dad took us out on a Saturday afternoon to give Mum some peace. Perching myself on a big leather club chair, I'd wait for him to come out of the changing room, wearing a Harris tweed jacket or woolen Argyle sweater, looking as much a movie star as Gary Cooper himself. Dad didn't buy a lot at Austin Reed, so what he did buy was precious, and nothing got more attention than his brogues. He always noticed if someone had scuffed their heels driving or hadn't cleaned their shoes. So, a couple of times a week, after Mum had cleared the dinner that she'd kept warm on a plate over a pan of boiling water until he got home from work, Dad would lay old newspapers on the kitchen floor and polish his shoes so bright the leather shone. My mother was just as immaculate. 5 years older than my father, she hadn't had Michael until her mid-30s and must have been considered geriatric for a first-time mother in the 1950s. She was in her 40s by the time I was born in 1960, but looked 10 years younger, and her exact age was an eternal mystery. She never discussed it, and there was only one response when we tried to find out. "I'm old enough," she'd say with a smile. With fiery red hair, green eyes, and pale Irish skin covered with a mass of freckles, she wore pencil skirts and jackets nipped in at the waist. She was one of 8 children brought up on a farm in the countryside of Northern Ireland. Her father worked the land by day, then played the violin and read poetry at night, so the love of learning was in Mum's blood. She aspired to something more, just like Dad, and while he moved up in the world through hard work, her job was to ensure that one day we'd make the most of it ourselves through education. When Tish once told her that she'd come 3rd in a class of 37, my mother narrowed her eyes and asked who'd got 1st and 2nd place. "Look at the mess of that page," she'd exclaim as she peered over our shoulders when we sat huddled around the kitchen table doing homework. "You can't be showing that to the teacher now, can you?" Leaning down, she'd rip out the pages we'd patiently worked on in our exercise books. "I want you to start again and write more neatly," she'd say. "I'll sit down with you, shall I, just to keep an eye? Do you want a biscuit to keep you going?" As far as my mother was concerned, education was the way her English children were going to get on in life. There was only one other golden rule. "Never marry an Irishman," she'd say solemnly to Tish and me.